All right, so the next thing that we need to talk about in making our entity relationship diagrams is the mapping of cardinalities. First, we talked about the first step is identify our entity sets. The next is identify our relationship sets, the relationships connecting our entity sets. Now, the third thing that we need to do is figure out the mapping cardinalities, this is figuring out the nature of the relationships between the entities. And our relationships from one entity to another via the relationship can be one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, and many-to-many. So let's go ahead and dive into this and look also at the diagrams that we will make as part of this. So we've already established this notion of a rectangular entity connected via a diamond relationship set to another rectangular entity. And what we need to decide actually is what are the cardinalities of this relationship, and as such, how do we need to basically decide, do we turn these into arrows between these entities, or do we leave them as these just plain undecorated lines? So the first one in that list is a one-to-one mapping. And what this means is that each row, so we're going to have a relationship between, let's just say, entity A and entity B. So we're going to have some relationship between the two of them. And when it's one-to-one, we make both of these into arrows, okay? And so we've got an arrow, here, and an arrow. I'll make this a little bigger so you can be sure to see. An arrow here and an arrow there. All right, so what this means, and we'll talk about this then, is each row of the entity A is matched. And again, think about like users and interests, or users and books connected by ratings, So we know that these are set up so that we can talk about, oh, well, this user rated this book the following thing. Well, that's a user being matched to some book. All right, so that's what we're talking about. So each of A is matched to at most one row in B. So what that means is 0 or 1. So at most, 1 means you could be matched to no rows in B. So we could have a user who hasn't rated anything. So who hasn't rated any books. All right. If we were talking about our users and our books. Now, this doesn't have the rating on it. So our other example were users and interests. So if A isn't matched, so users isn't matched with any interests, that means that user hasn't given any interests yet. All right. But if we were to say that there was at most one interest, that would mean then they could only say one interest. Well, I'm sort of foreshadowing that setup it wouldn't be right to have it as one-to-one. But so that's with regard to A to B. What about B to A? Well, it's one-to-one, which also means that and each row of B is matched to at most one row of A. All right, this is the one-to-one. One of these can go to one of these, and one of these can go to one of these, but that's it. They could also go to none, but at most will match 1-to-1. All right, now it can be a little tricky when starting off reading these diagrams. Okay, so we're gonna have to get in the habit of how do we actually read these. So to read the diagram, you should start at the entity. All right. Then go to the relationship. Then look at the link connecting to the other entity. So to put this sort of notion, so if we take that, let's say we're starting from A. What we really want to do is to think of, well, we got A, we've got this relationship guy here, and we've got B. To read about this relationship, when we're talking about cardinalities, so we go from A to, I have a relationship with B. So A has a relationship with B. Oh, and what's my cardinality with regard to B? I have at most one match to B. So arrow means at most one match. So we've got to know that. So arrows mean at most one, but which one? So it's me going to B. So I'm matched to one of B. And we read this way, B has a relationship with A such that one of B is matched with one of A. So if I'm a B, this means I'm matched with at most one of A. And if I'm an A, I'm matched with at most one of B. It's tricky because I don't know, maybe it's dyslexia or who knows what, but it's hard for me to keep it in mind. So I always have to go, oh yeah, I start here and I read that way. So I'm not like reading backwards arrows. The arrow is pointing towards the way I'm doing it. So it's this arrow that tells me about A's relationship to B, and it's this arrow that tells me about B's relationship to A. All right. So next cardinality is our one-to-many. All right, and I'm just going to draw it over on this side to match the way I have in my notes. A, we have relationship with B. All right, now A goes too many of B, and that means it's just a plain line. B, though, goes to only one of A. So we have one thing here, which means B maps to one thing, so that's the arrow, but A can go to many of B. So we start here, and this is not decorated. When it's not decorated, it's many. So one thing here can go to many things here, but each of these will go to at most one of these. So again, let's write this out. Each row in A is matched with, I'll spell it out this time, 0 or more rows in B. Each row in B is matched with at most one row in A. All right. We can fit another one on the board, I think. So many to 1. All right. So we got A. got some nice relationship diamond. We have B. All right. So many of A goes to one of B. All right. So I'm mapped to one of you. Well, and you are mapped to many of me. So that stays plain. Okay. And so this is, you could imagine, quite simply the opposite of this when I write it out. But basically, each row in A is matched with at most one row of B, and then each row of B is matched with 0 or more rows of A. All right. So just swapping each other. And again, one of me goes to many of you. One of you only goes to one of me. Because again, go from here to here. Oh yeah, 1B is related to 1A. But 1A is related to many B. Okay? And we could read the same thing, doing those same sort of jumping to the diamond and then reading that arrow. And we have one last one. Cardinality is the many to many. So we have an A relationship to B. One of me is related to many of you, so that's just a plain line. One of B is related to many of A, a plain line. Great. And so, yes, each row in A is matched with 0 or more rows in B. And I'm just going to save myself some writing and vice versa. Same for B, okay? B is matched with 0 or more rows in A. All right, so let's put this all together now. And if we are going to put it all together, I think, well, no, we'll just continue on and I'll keep it in this video rather than break. So again, our steps. First step to entity relationship diagramming is figure out your entities. Second step, figure out your relationships. Third step, figure out your cardinalities. Take it step by step by step and build up your diagram. All right, so we have this past example I was talking about. We have users. Each user has an ID and a name. We had interests. Each interest had a name as its primary key. We said they were related to each other because users can have interests, and we just made a relationship set called interested, and then we drew the lines between them. So that got us through the first two steps. Now we need to check our cardinalities. All right. So we'll ask ourselves things like, can a user have more than one interest? So a single user, one of me, if I'm a user, can I have more than one interest? And the answer is, I think yes. For my design of this application, absolutely. I want a user to have more than one interest. If I wanted to only have one interest, I probably only would have a single attribute here called interest. But anyways, I want them to have more than one interest. And so I don't change this line. One user can have multiple. So one user is interested in multiple interests. Awesome. Now let's look at the reverse direction though. If I'm an interest like hiking, can I have more than one user? Well, if we didn't allow an interest to have more than one user, no users would share any interests. Okay? Each user would have to have a unique set of interests. So a user would have multiple interests, but no one else would be allowed to share them because a single interest would go to a single user. Now a user though could go to multiple interests. Well, that's not the way I want the app to be designed. I want hiking or biking or whatever it is to be held to multiple users so that yes, it works the way I want it. And so yes, these cardinalities are good. I don't put any arrows. I want this to be a many-to-many relationship. All right. So you're like, well, I'm maybe still not getting it. Well, let's look at it this way. If we were to envision these as tables, we have an ID here and name. 1 is Bob, and 2 is Mary, and 3 is Beth. Let's go ahead, make you a cool little table. So column names, some rows, and over here we have some interests. We could be interested in hiking, sewing, dancing, and rowing. I don't know. All right. So each one of these is a unique word that names what that interest is. And so yes, we could have Bob could be interested in hiking, and Bob could also like sewing. All right. Unfortunately, Mary has no interests. Sorry. And then Beth happens to like to hike, and Beth likes to dance. But none of our users yet like rowing. Now, I'm not going to tell you how rowing got there. Maybe it was pre-populated, with some beginning interests that the database administrator put in there. Who knows? Anyways, you can see the way that Bob, so this one user, is mapped to 2 interests. So it's mapped to more than one. That's a many, okay? Mary's mapped to none, and that's fine because in a many-to-many, you can be mapped to 0 or more. And Beth here is mapped to 2. All right, same thing. Now, goes the opposite direction. Dancing is only mapped to Beth. Sewing is only mapped to Bob, but hiking is mapped to 2 users, and rowing is mapped to none. So again, this is what represents a many-to-many relationship. And you can do the same thing with all of those. You can basically say, yeah, I've got some table with rows. So table with rows here. When I draw the lines connecting the rows, where I'm matching them up via my relationship, these are what these lines are. Am I going to require it to go from 1 to 1? In other words, the out degree here will always be 1 and the in degree here will always be 1? Or will I allow them to map to one of these to map to more than one of these, and so forth and so on? This is your understanding of what the one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, and many-to-many is. It's matching of the rows between the tables. These are our diagrams that we're actually drawing. We have got our entity set, a relationship set, and an entity set. What's missing from here, I haven't drawn a table for the relationship set. I haven't shown you how we represent that yet in the schema. We'll get to it. All right, we've got entities, we've got relationships, we've got cardinalities. Our entity relationship diagrams are really coming along nicely. Okay. All right, let's take another example for the cardinalities. We always love examples. So this is one used with in the book. You can have the idea, and I'm not going to bother to spell out the attributes, but we're going to say that we have an instructor entity set here. Actually, we should say, I'm going to call it plural, instructors. And we have students over here. All right, so there should be a bunch of attributes, but for the sake of expediency, we're not going to do that. And we're going to talk about there being an advisor relationship, or you could, or supervisor, whatever it is. Some relationships such that instructors advise students. All right, so we go ahead. We've got this relationship. We draw those lines. So great, we've got some entities. They should, to do this properly, when you do your diagrams, you're going to need your attributes. This is just to make it quick for drawing purposes. All right, so let's set up the problem. Assume, this is the way I would normally think it would be, assume a student can have at most one advisor, but an instructor can advise many students. All right, so we're faced with this problem. What are we going to do for mapping of our cardinalities? All right, so a student can have at most one advisor. All right, so a student's relationship with an advisor is that one of these maps to only one of these. So that means change to an arrow there. So at most one advisor. This meant make this an arrow. Again, one of me, my relationship with advisors is I have one instructor who's an advisor. But an instructor can advise many students. So one of me can advise many students. So many, so leave that one alone. So that means to this, which is leave alone. Don't turn it into a one relationship. All right. That's the way you do it. Figure out your entities, figure out your relationships, figure out their cardinalities. Okay.